Get real advice from renowned experts and entrepreneurs on today's business leaders. Here's your host, Gabe Arnold.
All right, on today's show, I have Jason Kanigan, and he was referred to me by a very good friend of mine, Annabelle Beckwith, which I'm always happy to have guests on that she's referred, and always look for great referrals. And we are going to talk about entrepreneurship and space technology in the industry and culture and all sorts of fun things. So welcome to the show, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Gabe. I appreciate the chance to talk to your listeners and viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. So to start out, when did you first realize that you were an entrepreneur?
Probably back in like 2000, 2001. I ran my first copywriting business, and I'd been following Dan Kennedy for a few years by that point. Found his self-published big-ass yellow books in the library. And I was going to college at the time and just kept learning. He hadn't met Bill Glazer yet, so there was no Glazer Kennedy. And I thought, this copywriting thing sounds pretty cool. So I ran a little copywriting consulting business. And looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, the headlines were so clunky, announcing this and that, right? Really basic stuff. But it was more than what business owners had or knew at the time. They just, and still today, I think they're not that savvy. We're in our own little bubble here in the online marketing world, and we think, this stuff's all normal. But it's always good to remember that most people out there have never seen the back end of a WordPress website.
Yep. So you started there. That's pretty interesting. To be from copywriting to where you are now, and give us the short version of how you landed where you are today.
Okay. All right. So I had a 15-year corporate executive history. I was a factory manager when I was 25, which is what I went to school for. Managed 150 people and 6 supervisors reported to me a year later, and I realized I hated it. I just absolutely hated trying to manage people who didn't really want to be there. I wanted alert, smart people on my team who knew why they showed up today, were self-motivated, and to be working on big projects and that. So I did some other things. I was a credit manager for 4 years for a national electrical wholesaler, collecting $2 million a month. Got very good at talking to people about this very touchy subject called money, and encouraging them to do what I wanted. And so through all this time, I'd gone in and out of sales jobs. I'd do some production management thing and then go back into sales, and then get sick of that and go back into some operations role and then go back into sales. And I moved to the U.S. in 2009. My first role here was senior consultant to a consultative sales training firm. And since then, it's been wild. It's been, I've run my own businesses here for the last 8 years. And I do this now, which is this thing behind me. It's a data science, machine learning, and process improvement company. And I usually have to explain what that means, and we'll probably get into what that is as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things you mentioned when we connected and we reached out is you talked about how to be intentional about culture. And I think that's a great place to start, because for me, I didn't realize that was important at all when I started out. And I fortunately kind of fell into it and now very intentionally develop the culture that we have here on our team. But I don't think that's something that people pay attention to. And then they wonder why, after millions of dollars in investment and equipment, or after all these hires, or after all these big moves, everything keeps falling down. And it sounds like you've spent a lot of time digging into that and understanding that. And so I'd love to hear about your work there. And I'm sure part of what you do at Gold Star Technologies obviously affects that as well. But talk to us about why culture is important, and then how to be intentional in how you engineer it or how you create it.
Sure. And for folks who don't know, I've got a big screen over here with some notes on it. So you'll see me look over and check, because I don't want to forget about anything. So if you see me looking over here, I'm not being rude. I'm making sure I get the facts. So the deal with culture is, like, it's easy to blow off, right? Like, who cares? We're just here to make money. I just want to make a buck, right? But the problem is, like, we usually work with $2 to $10 million revenue firms, and they're past that, hey, I want to make a buck point. And the problem is, if they have not deliberately created their culture or accidentally created it by being clear with themselves about what they wanted in the first place, and then it just sort of came out of that. They create this Frankenstein monster that I call it, that it turns on its creator, right? And it eats you up. And the chief problem is you want to have your people make decisions the way you would. And if you don't have that happen, they're going to go all over the place or they're going to freeze. You can't grow and you can't have good operational tempo, which is the speed at which things are done and decisions are made, and that if everyone's scared, like that mouse or rabbit or something like that, right? So you want people who understand your values, understand your vision, and that goes all into culture, and proceed forward knowing what you would want and what you would do. And the problem with this, Gabe, is that it's not clear. I worked with a co-founder on the business before this one. He's a good guy. And he believes just as well or as much as I do on the value of culture, but he would rush ahead in terms of vision, and he'd be months ahead of me. And I don't think too slow, but he made me look like I was standing still. And I'd be like, I don't know what you're trying to do here. And so it was Kaplan, Robert Kaplan. I was watching this video of this guy. He was a Goldman Sachs trader and then moved out into sort of management consulting and thinking about this. And he said, you should be repeating your values and your culture and your principles and that to your people so often they begin to mock you. You're not going to get it if you just tell them once, is my point here, right? They need to hear it over and over and over again. We say like 7 times, until when you're not there. When that salesperson who works for you is out in the field and you are nowhere around and they're like, oh, I'm in this situation that what do they go back on, right? Oh, Gabe or Jason has said this thing 17 times. Okay, I know at least the direction to go in here. And that's part of creating a deliberate culture. So very valuable thing, coming up with a culture and a vision at the beginning. I would not leave it to chance.
Yeah, I think you've given me the absolute best definition of culture that I've ever heard, which is, you said it better than me, but I'll try to say it, where you said like essentially your team would know how to make the decisions the exact same way you would make them. Mm-hmm. And then your backup is amazing because you said, well, the only way they're going to know how to do that is if you repeat it over and over and over and over until they get it. That's really brilliant because that's probably, I think we've created a good culture on my team, but I don't think that I've gone all the way, honestly, of repeating. It's deliberate,
Yeah. It takes effort. Like I worked for this franchise business and they were doing well. They had 3 founders and the problem is they never got the culture figured out. They were making money and growing and whatnot, but no one ever could make a serious decision except for the 3 owners. And that created slowness, operational tempo issues. People lost enthusiasm, right? What's the point, right? And there was no loyalty, and there was a 6-month period in which they lost all their senior people. So me, the product manager, their training manager, their installation manager, and their best customer service person were all gone. Wow. within a few months, right? Because they just didn't give you a reason to be there and buy in, right, into that culture.
Yeah, and I guess I'm curious too, like where does it connect from repeating your values so that people can make decisions in the same way that you do or that the organization as a whole should make sense? Mm-hmm. You spoke a little bit earlier about how you were partnering with somebody and they were so far ahead vision-wise and they weren't communicating with that to you. How does that piece work because vision casting is not necessarily, directly related to decision making. I know it is, but like, is there a different component that applies to when it comes to culture creation?
I'm going to talk around this because I'm not entirely 100% sure what you're asking. So I'm going to say something and we'll see how you react to it, right? Okay. So he would come up with ideas and vision in that and be wanting to implement these things. And I would have no idea what he wanted. Okay. Right. And he would be like, why aren't you doing these things? It's obvious, right? Well, no, it's not, right? So yeah. I think repeated storytelling is a really valuable tool for conveying this vision and where you want to go. Like for this company, the truth with capital T's, right, is our highest value. You can be honest and be dead wrong, right? So this is a senior thing. And it also means that we are going to be brutally self-honest. And I've learned to filter for brutally self-honest business owners, who are a rare breed out there, by the way. Most people want to avoid conflict. So that drives a lot of that, right, of the execution. And so this is something, again, going, and I tell the people who work for me this story of, I have a vision of like taking over an old mall or something like that with a 3-story atrium or something and offices around it. And in order to get in, you have to walk through this opening, and you go in through an archway into the atrium, and then you can go up. And the truth are in 6-foot-high metal letters over top that archway, so that you remember it. And anytime I share that story, people are going to remember that, right? And so after a few repetitions, they're telling that story. And then they're going, okay, when they're doing their work, they're falling back on that. Well, wait a minute. Are we really getting at the truth here? Not just what we want to hear or what the client wants to hear, but the truth, which is often something that's painful. But if we want to get to change and improvement, then we have to really acknowledge the way things actually are, not the way we wish they were.
Yeah.
Where does that take us?
I agree. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's definitely where a lot of people struggle, is they're unwilling to face the truth, and then everything else falls down. And it's especially difficult when that's happening at the leadership and management level, because then it's not endorsed behavior, it's promoted behavior. It's, saying this is, it's acceptable to ignore the facts. It's acceptable to ignore the truth. Bad behavior is acceptable. And then everything definitely deteriorates from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or go data mine for the solution that you want.
Right. Let's go make the data match our agenda.
Yeah.
Definitely interesting. When you think about kind of where you've gone in the work you do now, one of the things I saw that you talk about a little bit about is like that you use machine learning to detect fraud. That obviously comes back to your core principle of where you're going to find the truth. And also then, from my estimation or assumption, is that also uncovers culture problems, obviously. So, because if somebody's doing that, they really don't understand the culture in the ideal, if the culture is, whole and where it should be. Talk to me a little bit about how you decided to use, that type of approach, machine learning, things like that, to uncover those problems. And then how does that help your clients?
Okay, so our chief data scientist, his day job is with one of the biggest companies in the United States, in the world probably, legal, healthcare, fraud prevention, credit extension, things like that. But he just happened to move to my town and show up to lecture at university meetup. And of course, I went over to him and said, hey, do you want to get into business together? And so he went back to the parent company, and they said, sure, as long as you don't compete with us in these areas, do what you like. And the thing he's responsible for is fraud detection. So we were just rolling that into the business. And obviously, it was a great matchup with our values already, right? And so we had to figure out a way to do that. How do you take a customer's accounting, bookkeeping data and filter it for opportunities? Turns out humans are very bad at creating random numbers. I'll give you the key for that. That's the secret. They think they're being smart and cool, but they're not. So bad news, Gabe. In just about every business we've investigated, somebody's stealing something. Somebody's trying to cover something up, and sometimes it's malicious, and sometimes it's not. There's just fear or confusion or something like that. But where that gets us to is the ability to identify for the client. Look, you as the business owner or the division leader or whatever believe you have a mental movie running about how things are in your organization, right? We are giving you the truth about how it's actually occurring, and there's this divergence, right? And when we clean up that divergence and make it a straight line, and everybody knows, yes, this is actually what's happening, and it's really happening that way, not you're being told. Somebody honestly answered my agent's interview questions to make the process map, but they were wrong, right? Or they misled in some way, perhaps innocuously, right? When we clean that up and everything's a straight line, all kinds of things, WIP, like work in process, inventory, sales cycles, all kinds of things, inventory reordering, will clean itself up pretty quickly. And so this is an area where we'll find out the truth about what's going on, and it will result in very strong, numeric, quantifiable business results. So that's kind of cool. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. No, that's super interesting. And what you said it's pretty interesting, and I'm not surprised that we're not very good at making up random numbers, because we all pattern everything, right? So we choose the same lies frequently. Or like you said, even if it's not super intentional, we end up just repeating our behaviors. As I kind of looked through what you're up to and what you sent over and shared, I'm super interested to hear about how you got into space technology and that space. And then also you made a pretty interesting comment that you were able to build a really powerful, Rolodex of connections in just a year in that industry. Obviously it's a newer industry in some senses. And you were able to dive right into that. How did that work? How did that happen for you?
You say that, but so I'd wanted to be in the space industry for a long time. When I was a teenager, I had sort of a vision of myself running an asteroid mining company, and I made the mistake of 16 years old, 15 years old, something. This is like 1990, telling people about it, and of course they mocked me and said, "Oh, that's fantasy," and I said, "No, that's science fiction." And I put it out of my head for a number of years. And then in 2014, 2015, I happened to see some news articles that there were a couple of companies, Planetary Resources and Deep Space Industries, that were actually moving in on this idea. Like they were asteroid mining proto companies, right? And I was like, holy cow, this is happening. Oh my gosh, right? And then I had this limiting belief though. And this is for all the founders out there who have this belief that they're not good enough, okay? I'm a pretty mentally tough guy, but I still thought, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not a scientist. I can't compete with some Stanford engineering grad, PhD or something. I'm not supposed to, is the thing, right? But that kept me out of the industry for like 4 or 5 years. I would walk around it. And so I started my own show, the Cold Star Project, about the unexpected challenges of scaling businesses. And I did that for about 1.5 years. We're over 150 episodes now, so I know exactly what it's like to produce what you're doing here and how much effort it takes in that. But finally, I did a couple of space interviews. I'd walk around the edges and that. And then last August around this time, September, I decided, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go into the space industry. And I had a friend help me with an Asana project about how are you going to learn all this stuff, right? Because I had no idea, right? Propulsion systems, engineering, fuels, things like stuff. And there was all kinds of things that I didn't know were important that I've learned are important, and things that I thought were important that really aren't. And so I thought, okay, the best way to learn is to get out there and interview these people, these experts, and learn myself. And a podcast or a show is a great way of door opening, right? That I've gotten access to people I could not have gotten this easy access to any other way. It turns out they like it. They like being a guest. So that enabled me to, start developing relationships, which I'm really good at, and start some working groups and find out, okay, what can I do for you, right? Like I would show up with that attitude. What can I do for you? I appreciate you. I want to learn about your slice of the world, because there are often very technical people who know about this narrow area. And they know that, right? And that they don't know about anything else. And they'll be like, oh man, I can't keep up. Well, I got the strength of being a generalist in this field, right? I see how it all works together. I may not know deep. I know deep in a pretty large number of areas now, but man, I see how it all fits together. And so, that has enabled me to develop that deep bench of people, of like space regulatory lawyers, operations people, experts at companies. I've got a connection at SpaceX, who's not a low-level flunky, And so it has enabled me to, like, Lieutenant Colonel Felt is going to be a guest on my show. He's in charge of the Air Force's Space Vehicles Directorate, right? And one of 4 primary authors of a Department of Defense paper that just got put out. And I was connected to him for a different reason other than that paper, right? I was already connected to him. And so going from, there's a great network effect, right? When you start off, nobody knows you, and like maybe a couple people will agree to connect with you. But after a while, there's 15 mutual connections or 100 mutual connections, and they go, oh, he's one of us. And so I've just done a job of like going out and meeting everybody. I held 2 virtual space conferences at the beginning of COVID because I saw the need for it, and I jumped on it. Like within 8 hours, I got that first conference organized.
Wow.
And so Zoom was still new to most people, so they didn't have the fatigue yet, right? After 2, they were done, but it was still a great experience, and I got business out of those two meetings. So, if you can host a show, I've become a very good interviewer. People tell me so I know. And that is a powerful skill. But if you can feel comfortable doing what Gabe's doing here, it is an excellent door opener, and I highly recommend you do it. So that's how I did it. And if you go to coldstartech.com, look at our humans page, which is my sort of tongue-in-cheek, like here's who works here kind of thing. You'll see, right? I've been able to make connections with these people and get them to come on board with me just on the strength of like me being a business guy and understanding something that they don't. Like I run a working group, and I'm going to stop there for a moment for air. With some British folks who are all high level in their field, and it's all about satellite tracking and things like that. They all knew each other, but do you think they would have worked together without me going over there and knocking their heads together and saying, let's get together on this and do something? No, they would have just sat there and looked at each other and gone, hey, buddy. and now we meet every 2 weeks. We're meeting again tomorrow and are sort of advancing the plot here. So,
and yeah, I totally agree with you. I think what works is if you connect with people and build a relationship, and you clearly come into that space and say, how can I help, or what do you guys need help with? It's not any harder than that. And I'm glad you shared, which is the same I think for all of us, because this is my 3rd attempt at having a podcast, and this one stuck because I stuck with it mainly. But it's we all have those limiting beliefs. We all have those fears, like, oh, I can't help, or I can't do this. And in reality, a lot of it just takes the persistence and willingness, to get out there and work on something, and the courage to realize that, hey, we all have, something to offer. And what you said there at the end is pretty interesting too, because a lot of the super brilliant people in the world, or people that are super niche down into something, aren't good networkers and don't connect the dots. And like, I would consider myself a generalist too. I know a lot about a lot of different things. And it makes it easy for me to connect the dots and go, oh, this could work here, or it works like this in this industry. So we can at least explore that over here. And that makes it easy to, have cross-domain knowledge and really serve and help people. So that's super cool.
Right. I've always been willing to be wrong as well. In particular, on behalf of my audience. I don't know how many times I've said something on the show, like a statement, a declarative statement, that the guest turned around and went, well, no, actually, it's the complete opposite. Okay, I've just learned to sit there with a straight face and go, okay, thank you, and not feel insulted or an idiot, or anything like that. So
no, that's good too. Yeah, you can't be arrogant if you want to be successful in the long run, that's for sure. And so it's pretty cool. Like, from being a teenager, you dream up that you might be able to work in the space, and now you actually take the leap to do it. What kind of like operational things do you end up helping them with, and where do you get to use all your knowledge and experience that you gained over the years?
Yeah, it's still a nascent industry. It's really new, right? So, especially commercial space. And I want to make a distinction for our listeners and viewers about old school Department of Defense, Defense Innovation Unit, NASA grants, right, or contracts, and commercial space, which I consider to be Gabe, the end customer out there in the public, is buying something from a company that makes or uses something in space, right? So that second part is really small. I talk with venture capitalists who invest in space companies, and we have a service that investigates companies that they're looking at investing in a number of areas. The business model, a lot of these guys don't know that they need a customer. And I'm not kidding. Like, it sounds ridiculous, but they don't know that. They just want to invent some cool tech, right? And think, well, why doesn't everybody else get this idea? Leadership, the regulatory stuff. I have great agreements with U.S. regulatory and international. We've got our international space law advisor in Christopher Newman. So we look at a number of areas and say, okay, is this realistic? Is it up to snuff? What pitfalls do you have? And then beyond that, we can install the solutions, right? I never wanted to be seen as a consultant. I want to be seen as an installer, the plumbers or the electricians or the framers of the space industry, right? Doing the muckety-muck work that nobody else wants to do, basically. Yeah. And so that's been a fun role. A lot of it's process definition. Part of my interest is in the order of things. In what order do we do things? Because if you do them in different orders, you're going to get different results. It'd be like making a cake. There's chemistry involved. And if you combine things in the wrong order, you're not going to have a rising cake, right? So in this case, we're looking at like parallel testing, for example. The way that the industry was before we got here was very series driven, like one thing and then another thing and another thing. And if you've got one testing bay, everybody's got to line up and wait for that one thing to be open. Well, why does it have to be that way? Nobody ever stopped to ask, can we do this all at once? How could we do it, right? And it turns out it's way cheaper to do parallel testing than it is to do series testing as well. So there are a number of areas where we look at particularly process stuff, regulatory stuff, and business model, match of product to market, that kind of fit. The customer development stuff, the commercial space founders are just generally not aware of that. They want to make some super cool thing and give us $100 million for it. And the VCs go, Jason, if I had $100 million to invest in space, I wouldn't know where to put it. And unfortunately, Gabe, $100 million in the real world is peanuts. So that shows you how small. It's a labor of love to be in this market. If I wanted to really make oodles of money, I'd be somewhere else. But it's fun to work on this stuff.
Yeah, it's super interesting. What kind of things do you see like moving into space that we do traditionally on Earth, or like what kind of things are coming down the pike that are viable to you?
So a lot of the stuff that I see right now are technological improvements on how we do what we do currently. They're not disruptive or transformative things. One of the most interesting things is data processing in orbit. That's called edge computing, which is like using the data or processing the data near where it's created. And that principle is really important. Like if I'm mining, and there's a lot of that lunar, Martian mining, in situ resource utilization. You can go to my YouTube channel and find playlists for all this stuff. I've got a bunch of episodes where I'm talking to people about these things. If I have a small vehicle that pulls dirt out and then filters it right there and kind of poops out the waste and keeps the good stuff, right? That's much better and more effective and efficient than digging up this entire huge mountainside, putting it in the back of an enormous mining truck that's as big as a house, driving that somewhere and then processing it in a big plant. But that's what a lot of mining companies do, right? And so data processing in space, in orbit, is going to be a big improvement because right now we're sending it back down to the ground station, over to somewhere to process, and then maybe back up.
Gotcha.
Right? If we could process it up there, we'll get rid of a lot of the waste and then only send down what we need to send down. So yeah, the lunar mining stuff with Artemis, especially the mission to go back to the moon, is really important. We are able to make tiny satellites now, like the size of a shoebox, called CubeSats, and that's an area that we really focus on. Our engineering advisor, Dr. Rick Fleeter, he works at Brown University and teaches at Rome's University, La Sapienza as well. He's been making small sats since the 70s. He's got so many stories about it, and he's seen all the goof ups, right? So he keeps us out of trouble. He does a great job of telling me, Jason, watch out. What about this? Because he's seen like this boom and bust kind of thing happen with the space industry before, right? One of the things about being a young guy, and I'm 45, so I'm still relatively young compared to these guys, right, who are 60, 70 years old, is they saw, like, and I'll say this to SaaS founders as well, who were in high school in 2008, like, I've seen stuff you haven't, right? Don't get too cocky. Because I've seen the value-added reseller industry just implode, in 2008. Yeah. And the internet marketing-related SaaS industry is going to go through something like that, right, where there's a correction. And you guys are going to scream and yell, and I'm going to go, I've seen it before. And in space, they've seen 100,000 people get laid off.
Yeah.
Imagine, right? I'm not exaggerating. So, it's great to have people on your side who have seen stuff that you haven't and have that experience to be able to come in and they know. They're like, oh, I know I'm the curmudgeon of the industry, but, and they'll try and be positive. So,
yeah, I think in all industries, I think it's super important to realize that everything just cycles and patterns, and we don't really diverge from that significantly. And so if you pay attention to all the patterns, they're going to repeat themselves. And that's when I finally realized that, 5 or 6 years ago, it's kept me out of trouble for sure. At least a little less trouble. What I'm curious too, because you may know about this, and I'm kind of a techie nerd myself too, is do you think the Amplify and all the satellite like cellular is going to come anytime soon, or is that farther out?
Within a few years, right? You've got a number of constellations that are going up right now. One of the things that people generally don't know is that we are hurling or about to hurl 100,000 or hundreds of thousands of small sats into orbit. You can go to celesttrack.com and load it up. They've got a beautiful online map of all the satellites in orbit and see just how many satellites are already up there in orbit. And then when you're done with that, back out with your mouse wheel and you'll see the geo orbit where the GPS satellites are. And so there's more. And we are about to throw tons more into orbit, right? So you may think, as I did, coming in 2015 and learning about the industry and that, this satellite tracking and traffic management must be taken care of. The military must already have figured it out. No, they do not. It is a mess. It is 1960s duct tape together technology, and I work with some of the best people in the world on space situational awareness, which is what is where. And people just don't know. There's no transponders. It's not like the FAA with aircraft. There are cameras pointed at the sky with telescopes in front of them. They see a streak, and they have to identify from that light reflection what that is. And they have orbital models that are okay, but not great. So it's like, okay, we're going to have maybe 3 constellations that are able to do cool stuff and give us better internet and all that stuff. And you could be out at sea in the middle of nowhere and have internet coverage. So it's going to be great for emergencies, search and rescue, that kind of thing. Disasters. There's no earthquake in space, right? Or tidal waves or anything like that. So we'll have better communications during earthbound disasters. But it's going to be a few years, and we've got a lot to figure out with this space situational awareness thing.
Yeah, that's what I wondered, how congested it was, because I didn't know there was going to be that many. So can anybody shoot a satellite up into space, or is there any because I know you can't fly a plane at certain heights or whatever in different countries. Like we have all that in the FAA, but is there any type of restriction, or is it just anybody can throw it up there?
Short answer, no, you may not. So Chris Stott, who's with the International Space University, which is based out of the United States here, and does very well, he runs a company called Mansat, which helps with something called satellite spectrum, which is the radio frequency. I have worked with people, Gabe, who were a year into building their satellite or building their spacecraft, and then they realized they needed to get satellite spectrum, and it's going to take you another year. So imagine the screw up on the production schedule, right? You are not going to launch. He just wrote, anyway, this Chris Stott fella. You can go look him up on LinkedIn, and I interviewed him on my show 2 times because he's a very interesting man. His most recent LinkedIn post is how the most difficult thing in space is getting permission. Getting permission to do something. So in theory, the costs of building a small sat have come down. I know Rick Fleeter, again, who works with us, the students at Brown with him built one for $5,000.
Nice.
But you usually get a lot of labor. It was a very simple satellite, just proving it could fly.
Right.
You could typically do it for $100,000 and ride share on a launch for $50,000 to $250,000, something like that. So it's affordable, but it used to be billions, right? Like if you didn't have $1 billion before and the ability to build a giant satellite because you're a prime contractor here in the U.S. or something like, McDonnell Douglas or something, you were a joke, right? And small sats used to be a joke to people, and then suddenly, oh, look what they can do, right? Yeah. So, yeah, short answer, no, you cannot just launch your own thing there.
I assume there was some kind of restrictions, but yeah, I was curious. Building one without knowing that's the first question I had. So
yeah, and that's the thing we can do is help people with their checklist.
Yeah.
Of, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do I need?
And is the like real estate, so to speak, in space expansive? Well, like you mentioned, we'll have these 3 different, essentially galaxies of satellites.
Yeah, they're constellations, right? So that you'll see this in Celestrak as well. There'll be layers, which somebody like Dr. Marek Ziebart would call shells. And the satellites tend to stay in their shell. But that is a limited natural resource. It is getting depleted. We are treating it right now as if it is an unlimited resource and nothing's ever going to crash into anything. We've already had some collisions. Guys like Dr. Mariba will freak out, justifiably so, about what's going on up there, and that we need to manage it better. And I think this industry is very conference dependent. And so when COVID happened, that was like slamming the door in the face of like thousands and thousands of people who really enjoy getting out there and meeting other people, right? And so despite Zoom fatigue, we're still having tons and tons of input meetings. And I think that the light has been shone on this issue considerably during the last 4 or 5 months. And that's a great service. However, to get to any sort of agreement, it goes all the way up to the United Nations, Gabe, and other non-governmental parties, like agencies that are above senior governments and that. By the way, I should get this out there. The nation state is responsible for the actions of its citizens. So if you launch a satellite and you're in the United States, Gabe, you're responsible for it. If you're in Canada, Canada's responsible for it. And so if you go bankrupt and your satellite's still flying around out there, your nation's responsible for it. So there's so many toes that can get stepped on here. And that's why it's very difficult to get agreement on anything.
Yeah.
Takes a long time.
I can imagine. It seems like a very exciting and very complex new space to work.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Right. Yeah. And if people want an easy to understand introduction to space law, and I know more space lawyers than I know engineers, go look for Christopher Johnson's interview on the Cold Star Project with the Secure World Foundation. And that will give you the easiest to understand, most pleasant, non-legalese introduction to the framework that we've had since the 60s. And it was made in the 60s when nobody could operate in space, right? Like 6 nations could do it or whatever, right? So, and now we're not quite in that situation anymore.
Yeah, it's way more accessible. So what kind of, as we kind of bring our time to a close, this has been super interesting. So thank you. What's your hope of, like, what kind of impact are you hoping to leave on the world and in space, this connected space to our world?
Yeah. So if you look at my LinkedIn profile, I begin with "Make Space Boring." That is our tagline. And I'm not in love with it, but it does the job, right? It immediately says we stand for this. And you either like it or you hate it. I've never had anyone say anything neutral about it, right? They'll connect with me and go, I love it, or they won't connect with me, I guess. but they get it, which is I want space and space-made products and services and us going to space jobs to be as normal as taking public transit or using terrestrial Wi-Fi today, where we just do it. We're not, and investors are putting money into it, and they're not like, gee, I wonder if this is going to explode on the launch pad, or anything like that. It's just, we just do this. It's normal. And, I don't push SpaceX very often. I'm not a fanboy. It's great that they're there, but other people need my help more than Elon, right? Yeah. He doesn't need my help. Yeah. But I do love the operational excellence in which, with which that they execute, right? If you look at a launch of theirs, and within 20, 25 minutes, they've put 16 satellites in orbit from the ground, right? Yeah. That gets me going. I'm excited about that, right? and that is also boring, right? It's still exciting to watch, but it's not terrifying white knuckle. Oh my gosh, is this going to blow up? Taking billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars of inventory with it. That's where I want us to get to, where things are normal, launches are normal. Services that we can't even imagine right now. There's things like self-sealing coatings. If you can grow crystals in space, there's no jarring around up there. And so without the vibration, which is a real killer to crystal growth, you're going to get a better product. There's all kinds of things that I don't think we can even imagine yet that will result from being made in space and then being brought back down here, that can be made better, cheaper, more effectively, and with qualities or features that we can't make in a gravity environment here on the ground. So I look forward to that. This is an evolutionary business. I'm not going to be in the consulting installation business forever, right? I do want to move into the manufacturing side of things sooner or later. And I'm just looking for that, okay, where's that spot, right?
Yeah.
What speaks to me about, okay, I need to jump into this. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jason. We've mentioned a couple times, but where's the best place for people to find out about you and follow what you're up to?
Yeah, probably best to connect on LinkedIn or go to coldstartech.com. If you go to the website, there'll be links to the audio and video versions of the show in the bottom left corner. In the first season, so I've divided it into 3 seasons. The first season would be very valuable to SaaS founders and agency owners, and I talked about more business typical things. And then season 2 is all with space founders and technologists, academics, that kind of thing, getting to know the industry. And season 3, which I recently started, is with investors who fund space companies. Now, there's stuff you can pull out from those interviews, right? Not just space stuff, but for general business, because the stuff that makes a business attractive to a space sector venture capitalist is going to be very similar to what is attractive to a regular VC, right? Yep. And you get to see a few different models, like things like Dylan Taylor and Voyager Space Holdings, very different model from the traditional venture capital model, allowing him longer time horizons. And that might spark an idea for you of, oh, wow, I could do that, right? And that's pretty neat.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on, Jason. We'll definitely keep in touch and see what you're up to in the next coming years here. And I appreciate you spending time with us today.
All right, Gabe. Thank you.
This show is brought to you by Today's Business Leaders. Learn more at our website, todaysbusinessleaders.com. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today.